Right now, the state of Colorado has a $9.5 billion budget that funds many important programs. About 33% of the budget goes to public education. 13% goes to the courts, corrections, and safety, and 30% funds healthcare. The rest of the state budget helps build roads and bridges, provides important human services like drug rehabilitation, mental health, and child protective services, funds higher education, supports agriculture across the state, and pays for a wide range of state services ranging from support for veterans to license plates. Unfortunately, the interaction of three constitutional amendments make it very difficult for the state to continue funding all these services for the citizens of Colorado. So, let's take a look at what's going on in our state.
In 2001, Colorado passed Amendment 23. Basically, this required that each year the state must increase education funding by at least the rate of inflation. In principle, this is an idea that is easy to support, but in practice, the story is more complicated. For starters, in 2010, when the recession hit, the state's revenue went down, but it still had to pay for all its services. This meant it could no longer afford to keep up with Amendment 23's requirement to increase education funding each year. So, the legislature reinterpreted the law and reduced the amount of funding given to education. This has resulted in what is known as the negative factor. In 2013, the negative factor, or money that should have been funded under Amendment 23, had grown to over $1 billion.
That's bad, but it's not the most problematic part. We only have to rewind 9 years to start to understand why. In 1992, Colorado passed the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, or more commonly known as TABOR. Think of TABOR as Colorado's anchor. The purpose of TABOR is to keep taxes and spending from drifting away and out of control. TABOR has three main provisions. First, all tax increases require a vote of the people. If you want to raise taxes, the voters must agree. Second, the state cannot spend more money than is spent in the previous year, plus inflation, plus population growth. This is known as the TABOR cap, and it means Colorado's spending can only grow by about 3% each year. Third, if the state takes in more money through taxes than allowed by the TABOR cap, it must refund taxpayers the extra revenue. So, what all this means is that when the economy is doing really well and Colorado citizens are buying and building more, the state is also limited in how much money it can take in. That's because any money generated above the TABOR cap must be refunded to the people. And we're currently projected to hit the TABOR cap in 2017, which means that money will go back to Colorado citizens instead of going to the services the state provides. Looking at the future, towards 2017, TABOR ensures that the state can only grow at a flat rate. But the cost of keeping open hospitals and schools is growing faster than TABOR allows. It's a worrisome future, but unfortunately, it gets worse.
We need to rewind another 10 years to 1982, when Colorado passed the Gallagher Amendment. This amendment established that businesses would be responsible for 55% of all property taxes, and residential homeowners would contribute the other 45%. Alone, Gallagher might seem like a good idea, but when it interacted with TABOR, problems began to arise. Since 1982, the property value of businesses has increased nearly fivefold, but the property value of homes has increased nearly 14-fold. Despite this, their share of property taxes has remained fixed. Currently, businesses represent only 25% of the property value in the state, but pay 55% of the tax. Homeowners, however, represent 75% of the property value, but only pay 45% of that cost. This means, with more homeowners contributing to property tax, the amount each homeowner must pay has gone down. Because property values were going up so fast, TABOR required localities to drop their tax rate. And don't forget, property taxes represent local government's main source of funding, especially for things like schools. Because local governments aren't taking in as much money, they can't give as much money to public schools. In 1989, the state paid around 40% of the total cost for public education, but now it pays almost 60%. By 2025, this could be as much as 70%. And even though the state is paying a lot for public education, they still have to fund all the other services Coloradans need, like roads, hospitals, and public safety. Remember, Tabor is the anchor that keeps our state in place. However, the water is rising, or the cost of just doing business is getting higher. And eventually, the state will be stuck to an anchor that holds us underwater.
That's the big problem with these three amendments. If we don't make some changes to the fiscal structure in Colorado, soon we won't be able to fund all the important programs Coloradans have come to rely on. That means no more funding for roads and bridges, human services, or higher education. And we won't have the funds to pay for any other government services.
If we continue down this path, soon we'll only have the funds to educate, medicate, and incarcerate, and maybe not even enough to do that.
Colorado's oil and natural gas industry is thriving, generating $8.4 billion in production value in 2012. In particular, oil production in the state is exploding. 2013 was Colorado's highest level of oil production in its history. Despite this explosion for oil and gas companies, the state's severance taxes on oil and gas have actually been declining. Severance taxes are a tax on the gross income of oil and gas severed from the state and intend to recapture a portion of the state's wealth lost through extraction of a non-renewable resource. Severance tax varies from 2 to 5%, depending on how much income the oil and gas producer earns. However, in the last 10 years, severance tax has actually been at an average of just 1.5%. These tax revenues are declining because Colorado gives a property tax credit called ad valorem, a stripper well or small well exemption, and other deductions that reduce the actual severance tax rate to an effective tax rate of 1.5%. The ad valorem credit works by reducing state severance tax liability depending on the amount of local property taxes paid on oil and gas production. Oil and gas companies receive a tax credit of up to 87.5% of all their property taxes. This credit costs the state on average $149.5 million per year. The stripper well exemption for smaller wells accounts for 45 to 55% of production and causes the state to lose on average $89 million per year in revenue. In total, these expenditures cost the state $266 million per year in severance tax revenue. Interestingly, severance tax rates across the state are very uneven because of the ad valorem credit. In 2013, Weld County produced 4.5 of Colorado's $5.5 billion of oil production. However, because Weld County has a high number of property tax mills, the county paid just 0.3% in severance taxes. In contrast, the effective severance tax rate is 8 times higher, or 2.4% on the western slope, where they produce much less oil. Not only do we forego plenty of revenue through these tax expenditures, but Colorado's effective severance tax rate of 1.5% is the lowest in the Intermountain West. Utah, 1.6%. Kansas, 2.1%. Texas, 3.9%. Wyoming and Montana, 4.5%. New Mexico, 6.2%. Oklahoma, 6.9%. And North Dakota, 10.6%. If Colorado had the severance tax rate of North Dakota, we would have generated an additional $1.1 billion in 2012. So, there is $266 million to $1.1 billion in oil and gas tax revenue that could go to fund education, healthcare, energy, transportation, state parks, water infrastructure, or other government services. Instead, it goes back to the oil and gas companies, and Colorado loses the value of this non-renewable resource. So what can we do to regain these dollars? We can repeal the ad valorem tax credit and the stripper well exemption. This step would require legislative action. However, to make the new revenue exempt from the Tabor cap and ensure that we do not exacerbate our fiscal crisis, the decision would have to go to a vote of the people. Additionally, we could raise the severance tax rate to rates more comparable with other states. This step would require a vote of the people to both make the change and make any new revenue Tabor exempt. What will the oil and gas companies say? They will say that if we change severance tax policy, they will leave the state, taking jobs and tax revenue with them. However, production in Colorado is still very lucrative, and tax rates in other states are still higher. We don't think they are going anywhere, and we want them to be a part of Colorado's bright future. So, we can generate a new revenue stream from this one-time resource to chart an aggressive path towards a better future for the state. We will direct this revenue into the Oil and Gas Permanent Endowed Trust, or OGPET, and use it to fund top priorities for Colorado: education, energy, and economic development.